All right, everybody. I think we'll get started. So on behalf of Season Health, I would like to welcome you all to this evening's webinar, Mind Over Platter, an Intro to Mindful Eating Part 2. Just before we get started, a few items to review. This is very interactive. We encourage you to use the chat to share your thoughts and ideas. Any questions that you have can be entered into the Q&A during the webinar as you think of them. And Emily and I will answer questions as time allows a bit later on tonight. For those of you who are not familiar with Season Health, Season offers personalized nutrition programs that help you learn to eat healthier without giving up the delicious foods you love. Friends and family can now sign up for Season 2. So if you know anyone who might be interested, they can go to seasonhealth.com and click on the Get Started button. So for those of you who are joining us for the first time, I would like to introduce your host for this evening, Emily Nischberg and myself, Abby Thibodeau. For those of you who participated in part 1 of our webinar series, welcome back. Emily and I are part of a large team of Season Health registered dietitians that provide nutrition support to help people achieve their health goals. So let's talk a little bit about the agenda for tonight. We're going to provide a brief recap from part 1, and then we're going to dive a little bit deeper into the experiences you have had in the past few weeks as you began your journey discovering hunger and fullness. We will also be sharing some new tools and activities that will continue to support your growth in mindful eating. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Emily to get us started. Oh, Emily, I think you're muted.
Thanks, Abby. All right, so happy to be with you all. I'm excited to start with a recap from part 1. Some of you may have been in part 1, others may not have been, but it's always nice when we're starting new skills, we're building new skills, we're exploring food in a new way to review and to consistently try. So we're going to review a little here. When we started our webinar last time, part 1, we did start with a question or a sentence where we asked people to fill in the blank. And we're just going to try this again tonight. You can see the question to fill in is food is. So what would your response be to that? It could be one word, it can be a couple, but food is. And you can see from the screen right now, we're sharing some of the responses that we had on Instagram when we asked the same question. So you can see we have love, it's delicious medicine. I see on the screen, food is life, right? I see it's fun, it's energy, it's scary. Sometimes it may be confusing or overwhelming. So we can have these positives, maybe some negatives as we fill in that blank, and maybe some neutral answers. But what we see from all of this is that food is many things, many different things. And that if we navigate food only by navigating it with this idea of calories or nutrients or maybe carbohydrates or proteins or fats, we're not taking into account all these different aspects of food. I see comforting. Yeah, food can be comforting. So mindfulness can serve as a tool, or mindful eating can serve as a tool to help us start to navigate beyond just calories, beyond just nutrients. How do we navigate food to take into account all these different parts of food for us, whether it's life or it's comforting? So when we think about mindfulness, we can describe it tonight in a really basic way. It's awareness of the present moment. And even though it's easy to describe, it does take practice to achieve mindfulness. And we're going to, of course, review some skills tonight around mindfulness. We're going to build new skills around mindfulness, and in particular around mindful eating. So awareness in the present moment without judgment. And sometimes that's the addition that can sometimes feel hard. Often when we're navigating food and food choices, we can be critical. And when we're thinking about mindfulness, it's an invitation to be curious over being critical. Mindfulness also can give us choice whenever it comes to food. And then our last conversation in part 1, a lot of us were connecting around the ideas that many times when we're experiencing food, it can feel like our experience with food can be out of habit. It can be out of impulse or reaction. So just curious, whenever I say those words, experiencing food out of habit, impulse, reaction, and putting it in the chat, how many of you have experienced food in that way? Where, oh, I'm eating and I'm eating because it's time to eat. Maybe I'm not hungry, or I'm eating and I didn't realize I ate so much, or something happened and my reaction is to eat. Many of us can experience that, and mindfulness can be that tool to start helping move from habit, impulse, reaction into space, a pause, a space for choice. So if we just try that for a moment now, just with a small activity, just taking 3 or 4 deep breaths, right? Allowing yourself a little pause, a little space to take those deep breaths. And I'm going to encourage you to try it. And just feeling the air come in at the nose, moving down the back of the throat, all the way into the lower belly, and then back out again. Not feeling any push or strain, just experiencing the deeper breaths. And perhaps you're already feeling that space that will give you an opportunity to move out of that autopilot of eating sometimes. In session 1, we also explored being able to tune in, being able to pause and feel and be aware of hunger and fullness. And Abby's going to move into reviewing that, the hunger and fullness scale and our discovery activity.
Great, thanks, Emily. So what you're seeing here as Emily switches over to the next slide, were some tools we shared in part 1. We talked about how these can be used to begin your journey of increased awareness of your body's hunger and fullness signals. The hunger and fullness scale in the upper left corner is a way to help become more aware of your hunger levels. The worksheet in the bottom right corner is simply a way to journal the food you ate, your hunger and fullness levels, and your satisfaction level from the food. So journaling in this type of way, again, is just increasing your awareness before, during, and after your meals. We all have the ability to feel these physical cues and tune into our hunger and fullness signs. Sometimes, it can be really difficult at first. You may have found this in the last few weeks because your cues or your voices could be silenced or even ignored due to your own personal experiences and relationship with food. Or even if you have current food rules, some of those can really silence our own hunger and fullness cues. For those of you that were here for part 1, we would love for you to share in the chat what you may have discovered as you ate over the last few weeks, and use these tools to sort of discover your hunger and fullness. And so please feel free to share in the chat if you're comfortable, anything that you experienced or learned as you tuned into this or became more mindful around your meals in the last few weeks. I'll just give you guys a few minutes or seconds here to respond.
And it's okay to even say, it was hard to tune in, right? It's okay to say it was a difficult process. Okay, I'm going to move on to the slide, but we still are watching the comments as they come in, what your experience was. So sometimes, right, we may not be seeing that tonight in the chat, but even if we pause, lots of times when we do this hunger and fullness discovery, right, we're checking in, we're becoming more aware of hunger and fullness, those sensations in our body, those physical feelings. I see that someone's been trying to get more in tune. Yeah, slowing down. Yeah, when we check in, we do have to slow down. And it does allow some space for enjoying the experience. I'm seeing that comment right now coming in. Yeah, so when we slow down, we're checking in on hunger and fullness, we can discover some new things. Sometimes we can discover we haven't felt hunger or fullness before. We're not always feeling those things. Or we may discover other levels of hunger and fullness that we weren't quite able to put our finger on. Other times we may notice I'm eating when I'm not hungry. And that we may be tuned into this idea that I'm eating when I'm not hungry, and I may be eating out of emotional hunger, right? Or I'm eating emotional eating. And Abby and I and our team of dietitians, this is something that is very common that comes up in our sessions as we're trying to navigate all those different aspects of food. And the truth is, we don't always, in our everyday experience with food, we don't stop and explore the emotional piece of food or that emotional eating. And we're going to dive a little bit deeper into that because it does impact, for many of us, it impacts our food choices and our experience with food. So if we're thinking about emotional eating, the reality is that emotional eating can come with some benefits, right? Some good things. And emotional eating can also come with some not so good things. And so if we dive deeper, we do want to explore how is it serving me and how is it maybe not serving me? So if we were thinking about, again, opening it up in the chat, if you're thinking about when I eat in response to emotion or I eat what we might term emotional eating, how is that serving me? How is that doing something good? I'd love to see some chats here. Sometimes we hear, just gives me relief, right? I'm in this moment where I feel like I have no relief. And then I choose to eat and there's this moment of relief. If you're hearing something that you agree with, you can maybe put the plus sign, right? Yeah, I can really relate to that. Maybe it's an uncomfortable situation. It's a really difficult emotion and that can give you some comfort. Eating gives us comfort. Or maybe it relieves our stress. Or perhaps we're just so overwhelmed with dealing with that emotion. It's exhausting. We just need a distraction from that moment, a distraction from dealing with that emotion. So those can all be ways that emotional eating does serve us. Maybe it's serving us in the short term, but it does serve us. And then if we flip that and we think about what are the cons, what are the things that are not so good, not serving me well when I'm eating out of emotion or I'm experiencing emotional eating. Yeah, I'm seeing for sure someone's relating to that distraction, right? Like it does give me some distraction from that difficult emotion or difficult situation. Some cons, if we move into cons, maybe just thinking about a time where you did eat in response to an emotion or to cope with an emotion. What did you feel? What was the experience? Sometimes we can feel guilty or we can be really critical of ourselves. Maybe we were eating to deal with the emotion, but we truly weren't hungry and we were maybe even full in that moment because we were coping with that emotion with food. We came to a place where we were overfull, we were stuffed and we were very uncomfortable. Or maybe we felt sluggish after that experience. Sometimes we might notice, yeah, I'm seeing this here, like super full, distracted. Oh, even distracted due to a conversation that's going on, other things that might be happening around that emotion or around that situation. Yeah. So you all are really starting to, sometimes it's hard, right? To identify these pros and these cons, and it does take time. It's hard to identify. I'm just making space, maybe tonight or tomorrow, and making a table like this. How is it serving me? And how is it maybe not serving me so well? So we're going to dive deep, right? We said we're going to dive deeper into emotional eating. We've identified those pros and those cons. Now let's build some skills that might be helpful because we know food is so much more than calories, so much more than just nutrients. So when we notice that perhaps we're not hungry, we've checked in, we've paused, we've created that space for choice. We know that we're not hungry, maybe we're full. We find ourselves in front of, we're in the kitchen, right? Or we're at work and we're opening up the snack drawer or headed to the break room, or maybe we're heading out in the car to grab a bite to eat because there's something going on. We notice that we're not hungry. We notice that we might be full. In this situation, can anyone relate to that? Out of curiosity. Maybe we're looking for food, but we're not hungry. We're full. Something else is going on. Yeah, someone says, definitely, I can relate. Another person says, yes, I see some pluses here. We can all connect with this. So when we've noticed we're not hungry, maybe we're noticing we're full, there's no physical sensation of hunger. We're needing something because we're looking for food. We're needing something, but it's not hunger. And so we might not need to cope with that need or address that need with food. So a really powerful question can be, what do I really need? right? So allowing yourself to take a moment and just say, what do I really need? It's a pause again. And asking this question is, again, bringing us back to that out of autopilot. Like I generally, when I'm stressed, I eat this, or I overeat, or whatever it may be. We're taking ourselves out of that autopilot by asking this question and giving us choice. So if we look, let's practice. So if we look at this wheel that you see on the screen, this is the emotions wheel. And what are some emotions that you can connect with on this wheel that maybe have put you in a place before where you want to eat to cope with this particular emotion? Because it might bring relief, or it might bring comfort. Is there an emotion that you can connect with on this wheel? Maybe it's a positive emotion, right? I'm seeing stress. Yeah, stress is a common one. Sometimes we can, when we're stressed, we can be on autopilot, right? Just trying to deal with that emotion. And sometimes that autopilot is dealing with it with food. So if we notice we're not hungry, we have this emotion of stress, and we ask ourselves, what do I really need? I'm not hungry. What do I really need? What would be some activities, some ways to cope that would not include food? You're feeling stress and you're choosing because you took a pause, you checked in on what do I really need? What are the answers? Take a walk. Yes. Taking a walk can be a great way to deal or cope with that emotion. Visit the calm room. If you've got a calm room, yes, right? Or maybe you have a space where you can step away. Reading, all great ideas. Ooh, I like this. Taking a pause, doing a stretch, right? Moving your body. Gardening, another great answer. For now, you have these new lists, right? So tuning into these ideas, because these are things that you can use, right? When you're feeling this emotion of stress. Ride a bike. All excellent answers. And we might find that, someone's way to deal with that emotion might not be ours, but these are great ways to think about how we might cope with that instead of an emotionally eating. So these came pretty fast, right? We connected with stress. We started having the ideas. The comments are rolling in. Sometimes our emotions or the situations are a little more complex, right? It might be hard to even think about what the emotion is. It may be hard to think about, gosh, what comes next, right? My habit or my impulse or reaction has been to cope with it with food. And I'm trying this new way, but it's hard to navigate this. So if we move one step deeper, we're going to move into what we call the allows practice. And this is new, right? So I'm going to introduce this concept that's really new tonight. And when we add new concepts or new skills or explore new things, sometimes it can feel a little awkward, right? A little uncomfortable. And this might feel like that, right? Because it's a skill, it's an exploration of emotions and emotional eatings that we may have never done before. And so I'm going to invite you to try this. There's no pressure. You don't have to do it. But if you're up for, trying to dive a little deeper in emotional eating and want to try it out, you may find it really helpful. So the allows practice is a really concrete set of steps that help us identify the emotion, move through the emotion, and land on some ideas around what we need or what to do next. So I'm going to ask you, if you're participating, you're walking through the allows practice, I'm going to ask you to just remind yourself of a difficult emotion that you've had recently. The A is you're going to acknowledge it. Maybe you say it in your head or even say it out loud. Man, this is a difficult emotion, right? The L is labeling the emotion. So sometimes we might need to look at that emotions wheel, or maybe that you can just put a label on it right away. But just by labeling the emotion helps to release some of the reactivity connected to that emotion. And now just letting it set, like letting it be, let that emotion be for a moment. Allow yourself to feel the emotion. Maybe you notice sensations or thoughts connected to the emotion. You don't have to struggle. You don't have to fight or resist it. And let that struggle or resistance to emotion just melt away. And then the O is observing the emotion. So when we observe the emotion, we might think about sensations. Are there sensations that I'm feeling as a result of this emotion? Maybe we can connect a shape to the emotion or even a color to the emotion. Just trying to tune in to where you're feeling, where you're experiencing that emotion in your body. Is it located in your chest? Or maybe you're feeling it in your head, or there's tension in your neck and your shoulders. And then we move into the W, which is widening your view. Actually visualizing the space around that emotion widening, where you can see new things. You have new space. There's a new perspective that comes in that space. And with this new space, you have wisdom that you're not the feeling, you're not only the emotion, you're not just the thought that goes with the emotion. You're in a fresh space with freedom and new possibilities for choice. Now we're moving into the S, which is self-care. So now asking yourself, is there anything else that I might need in this moment? Do I need a breath or a pause? Is there a positive action step that I might be able to take? Can I offer myself some words of kindness? Perhaps I need to do a self-care activity, a nourishing activity, or maybe I need to communicate with someone else. All right, so if you just practice that, go ahead and come back into this space. Maybe your eyes were closed, you can open them. That's a skill, right? It does take a little bit of practice, but you will have this recording and you can practice the allows. You can practice allows practice as you try to navigate some of these emotional eating. All right, I'm going to send this on over to Abby, who's going to talk about other things that might impact our eating beyond emotions.
Great. Thanks, Emily. So as she had said, she took us through exploring emotional eating and tools that can help us sort of figure out what we might need in the moment. But there are also other situations that may have come up for you in the past or even in the past few weeks as you continued to explore your hunger, when you found that you were hungry and ready to eat. I didn't notice anything in the comments earlier when we were talking about discovery, but I'm wondering if you've noticed, and maybe you just think about this or feel free to chat in the chat box, but what happened when you missed a meal or you didn't get a chance to eat breakfast, or maybe you missed lunch because you were busy at work, or even both, you missed breakfast and lunch? Did you notice anything different about your eating patterns later in the day, or how you felt, what your hunger level was like? And again, feel free to just think about it, or I'll continue to watch the chat here. Um, and so what I'm referring to is this thought around deprivation. So while emotions are tied to eating or overeating, deprivation can also lead to situations that can sort of create these negative thoughts around food, maybe guilt or shame. The first thing we want to talk about is biology, not willpower. Sometimes when we are following a specific meal plan or trying to eat healthier, when we go away from that, we can feel guilty, or that we're not strong enough to follow that specific meal plan. The tough part is that if we're not feeling our body consistently and properly throughout the day, we're attempting to fight biology. It's not a matter of willpower. Biology will always win. This can set us up for being overly hungry and overeating later in the day. So thinking about your eating patterns can also lead to some of this that leads us away from eating mindfully. Did you find it hard? We kind of talked about, I see hangry in there. Yes, definitely. And hangry can lead to that feeling of like eating everything. As soon as you get home, you're not only making the meal, you're snacking on the meal as you're eating it without even thinking, because that hunger is just taken over. That's biology. That is not willpower. As I was saying a little bit ago, some people find it hard as they start to explore mindful eating, difficulty around using the hunger scale. Some people can't feel that light hunger. Like I said, it's not until we get to that hangry or extreme hunger level that we feel it. If we ignore that hunger over and over, our brain gets so used to ignoring hunger signals, they begin to fade and we don't hear them anymore. And then we can only hear them when it's really extreme, like I said. This leads to lack of trust in our body because that ravenous extreme hunger leads to overeating and a feeling of being out of control. So it's like this total distrust or sort of disconnection from your body. That distrust, again, can lead us down the path of trying to find a magical pill or supplement or even another restricted sort of diet plan that promises to fix everything. And then that cycle begins again. We also want to think about not only providing enough fuel throughout the day, but deprivation can also mean restricting certain foods or food groups. Have you ever told yourself that you're no longer going to eat a food item? What typically happens? And again, I'm totally open, chat, think about it. This is what we call rebound eating. What happens is the more we restrict that food, eventually we're going to give in for most of us. And we tend to overeat that item when we allow it back in. This is rebound eating. Or maybe you've planned to start a new diet on Monday. It's Sunday, the day before, and you're thinking about all these foods that this new plan doesn't allow you to have. Maybe you can't eat sweets, no desserts, no carbs, no white bread. So all you can think about is those foods. Gosh, I'm going to miss the desserts. I'm really going to miss, white pasta or, white bread that I enjoy every once in a while. It leads to this, what we call Last Supper eating. So that feeling of not being able to have that food ever again. So we embark on this overeating, overconsumption of these foods because we're never going to get them again. Again, this is that thought around Last Supper eating. So again, not allowing yourself a specific food or food group can actually heighten your desire for that food. It triggers cravings, obsessive thoughts about those specific foods that you may restrict or aren't allowed, and even compulsive behaviors, and lead to some really tough situations. This is why restrictive eating plans or diets don't work for most people. It's not that people fail the diet, it's that diets don't work. Again, back to depriving ourselves. So as we deprive ourselves, the typical cycle is that guilt or shame decreases. We're feeling good. We just started this new plan. We're limiting the desserts. We haven't ate any for a few days or even weeks. So we're feeling really good. So, the guilt and shame is really low. Then for most of us, you reach a point where you can't restrict the food any longer. Maybe somebody's birthday party comes up and there's a beautiful chocolate cake and it's really hard to restrict. So you're sort of kind of playing that battle with your mind and your body. You allow yourself the food, you're no longer denying yourself, but then the guilt goes up because you're not restricting that food or following that specific meal plan. And sometimes you might even feel like a failure because you didn't follow that plan. The key to ending this is giving yourself unconditional permission to eat and making peace with food. So let's talk a little bit more about that. So I'm going to give you sort of a way that you can start to create peace around food. Emily, if you want to jump to the next slide, thank you very much. I see that you did. Make peace with food. So this activity here can really help with, again, finding peace with foods that you have felt that are really scary or forbidden in your world. You want to make sure too that you're honoring your hunger throughout this process. It does take time to build trust again in yourself. If your hunger is at a 1 or a 2, so you're like ravenously hungry going into this, you're probably going to overeat regardless of your plan or intention. So the steps here, pretty straightforward. You're going to make a list of all the forbidden foods or scary foods that you love, but you don't eat because you're fearful. You might lose control or you might feel they're bad foods. Please feel free to share a food that might fit into this description for you in the chat. I kind of love to hear what some of those foods are for you all. I hear desserts a lot with the people that I work with. Emily, you can jump into things like bananas. I'm checking the chat here. Cheesecake. Yeah, cheesecake is delicious. So as you make that list, you're thinking about all those foods that you feel guilt, like I said, or that you really try to restrict. Pick one off that list and go and purchase that food, or maybe even go to a restaurant and order that food, whatever works best for you in that time. As you begin to eat that food, of course, we want to be mindful, the whole kind of everything we've been talking about, right? You want to eat the food mindfully without distractions, using your senses. Notice the aroma, appearance, flavor, texture as you're eating. Does it taste the way that you thought it would? That you maybe were thinking in your head, right? Is it as satisfying as you thought it would be? Or maybe it doesn't taste as good. You may not decide to even finish it or even to bother with it in the future because it just wasn't as good as you maybe built it up in your head because of that restriction or limit that you put on that specific food. But if you really like it, give yourself permission to eat it in the future when you want it. You may decide to keep that food in your home so that it's there when you want it. For a lot of people, that might be really scary at first, because again, you're building trust, and it might not be there as you start this food peace activity. If that's the case, and it's too scary, make a promise to yourself that you will buy enough for one sitting when you really want it, or order it at a restaurant when you're really feeling like having that food. When you're ready, you can choose another food you circled on that list and practice that process again. This practice really is all about helping decrease the fear that you may have around certain foods, and that will allow you to trust yourself again around foods. So, since we're talking about choice, right, and making peace with food, Emily and I, and our group of dietitians at Season, still get a lot of questions about, well, what do I eat? How do I still eat what I want? You're telling me that I can eat anything I want, but also honor, think about health goals. It is doable. It can get super confusing and overwhelming to figure out what to eat, but instead of listening to all the outside noise, what if you're listening just internally, as we've been talking about both tonight and in part one? The problem is if we listen to the noise, eat this, don't eat that, it can lead us back to that restrictive eating pattern, and the cycle resumes, as we just talked about. The good news for most people, all foods can fit in, and this gives you choice and freedom. Again, if you're concerned about specific health conditions, or that are going to support you in feeling your best health, definitely talking with your seasoned dietitian about that. But again, giving yourself unconditional permission to eat and making peace with food will eliminate the power that certain foods can have over you. Yeah, so I'm seeing the question about medical restrictions, and definitely that is something we need to take into account, right? So if you do have medical restrictions around food, that is something that is also honoring your body, nourishing your body the proper way. So of course, if there are nutritional restrictions, that is part of eating mindfully and honoring your body and your health. Because if you're eating against that, right, we're also thinking about how we feel after our food choices. So, there's probably certain foods that aren't going to make you feel well. And so there's this natural progression of sort of choosing foods subconsciously that are going to make us feel good. We kind of return to that. And that sort of happens naturally as we continue to eat mindfully as well. So let's walk through a scenario using the questions that you're seeing on this pretty straightforward slide in front of you. I'm going to take you through a typical mindful scenario as I'm choosing what I would eat. Okay, so gosh, my hunger is definitely around a 4 right now. I'm really wanting something sweet and cold. Ice cream sounds really good right now, and I know I have it in the freezer. Oh, and I also have berries in the fridge. Those are cold and sound good too. I could probably eat a really big bowl of ice cream. Oh, that sounds so good. I know my evening meal is going to be a little bit later. My husband's going to be late, so I definitely could eat a big bowl of ice cream. But wait, the last time I did that, that caused my blood sugar levels to go really high. It did last time, and I also got a headache and was super sleepy after I ate it. So what if I had a smaller bowl, added some berries on top? This would probably prevent my blood sugar from going too high. I'll feel better. And if I'm still hungry, I could have something else like, okay, I see I have string cheese, which sounds good too. This might keep me from being too hungry going into my evening meal much later on and really won't affect my blood sugars in a negative way. So, through this scenario, hopefully you can see that these thoughts, what do I want? What do I need? What does my body need? So, honoring potentially nutrition, right? What we need and what do I have? So, what do I have on hand? What do I have available to me? Can be so helpful when struggling with choice. Again, this practice using these questions can still create choice and freedom without feeling deprived or restricted while still honoring your health goals. So we have presented a lot of activities and tools during our time together that you can use to continue your journey. We so thank you for participating and chatting throughout the evening. Now it's time for Q&A session with Emily and myself. I don't know if we have any questions. Emily's going to fill me in here.
Hi. So it doesn't look like any questions have rolled in. We've had a few comments that sparked a question, right? Or we responded to. So what we're going to do is, while you're thinking about these questions, sometimes we just, again, need that space, right? To think about the questions that we have. Go ahead and you can either put them in the chat or there is a question and answer feature as well. And we're going to be looking at those. So we'll maybe just talk a little bit while we're waiting to see if any questions and answers come in. So just a couple of things to be thinking about as we're wrapping up our webinar, our part 2 tonight, is really just thinking about what might you take with you from part 2 or even part 1. As Abby said, we explored a lot of different skills, a lot of practices that you can explore and take with you. So out of curiosity, what's something that you might carry with you from either tonight or the previous session? If you feel comfortable putting that in the chat, will you take with you the idea of checking in to your hunger and fullness and looking at that hunger scale? Or maybe the allows practice. Good. Great. Practicing that skill. Maybe asking yourself the question, what do I need? Using the worksheet that we shared in session 1, the hunger and fullness discovery. Maybe making peace with food and taking some time to make that list of foods that sound good and circling and checking those and then exploring those ones that felt like they were off limits, making peace with that. So really taking just a moment to identify, what will I carry with me? There's no expectation here to carry everything with you, but maybe just starting with that one thing that really resonates with you. You can also expect receiving a survey to give us some feedback on this evening's webinar. We love the feedback. It helps us shape future webinars and also helps to make sure that we're fine-tuning these to make sure that they're meeting your needs and serving you well. We also want to encourage you to mark your calendars for September 20th. That's the date of our next webinar. You'll be getting details via email, and this will be a special webinar with our seasoned chef Araminta. Definitely a webinar not to miss, so mark your calendars. Remember, we've still got question and answers, the Q&A open, so if you've got something to submit. And then just reminding you that you have some resources to help you navigate mindful eating. You'll get the recording of this session. You can also, if you registered, you'll have the recording of part 1, but if you weren't able to get that, you can ask your seasoned dietitian to send you the link to that. We have our worksheets that we've shared with you. And then, of course, we want you to feel really comfortable with just exploring some of these concepts or maybe questions that come up with your seasoned dietitian. So I am seeing one question come in. I need to move this over so I can see the full question. So this is, I tend to reward myself after a long day with dessert. Do you have any tips to help me avoid doing that? I have a thought, and Abby, I imagine you might have a thought as well.
I'd love to hear what you have to say, Emily.
My first thought is it's just what we practiced tonight, right? You're recognizing you have such great awareness around, like, it's a hard day, right? I need something, I need a reward. I need something that nourishes me. And so maybe it's just that question of, checking in with hunger, noticing you're not hungry, and just asking yourself, what do I really need in this moment, right? I've gone through a long day. I did some really good work. It was hard. It was hard to get through that day. I want to reward myself. And in this moment, what do I really need to reward myself? And the answer might be dessert, right? Because there's choice here. The answer might also be, I just need like to decompress. That might mean listening to an audiobook while I walk around the block. That might be listening to my favorite music, might be calling a friend just to have a transition from work into my own life. What are you thinking, Abby?
I totally agree. That's where my thoughts were going. And also, I wonder what it's sort of putting a condition on desserts, right? Like you only deserve dessert because you had a hard day. So we want to think about that as well. And I think, as Emily said, right, truly rewarding ourselves, that can come in many different ways. Like she said, it can be dessert, but is that the only time you allow yourself to dessert? So again, it's sort of putting this condition or restriction, or maybe even a food rule. So that's something to kind of contemplate and think about, how that plays a role in your relationship with food. And also thinking about, just when you really, really want dessert, that's okay, right? We're honoring our hunger, we're honoring our body. We're going to eat when we're hungry, or like Emily said, in those times too, when we just really want it and it is supporting that, that's okay too. So I think looking at that too on both sides can be really helpful as you move forward.
And I think the beauty of all of this is we think about mindfulness is awareness without judgment, right? So like we can try lots of different things and there's no wrong way, right? That's being free of feeling like there's a wrong way to do it is really powerful. So I'm
And that's
not
how we
seeing,
learn, right?
yeah,
It's part of it's the learning process. So there's no wrong way, right? Each sort of mindful space allows for learning. Like, okay, I overate, I don't feel great. What can I do differently? Or, what happened in this situation that I can take from and continue to move forward?
that just reminds me of the phrase I like to use so often, which is just curiosity, right? Curiosity
Yes.
over criticism. So you all have been very gracious with your time and given us an extra 10 minutes. Thank you so much for allowing us some extra space tonight to explore this really important concept and start to arm ourselves with some new skills. Remember, September 20th is our next webinar, and your seasoned dietitian is ready and willing to help you to continue to explore mindful eating. Thank you all. We hope you have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, everybody.